So let's get into it. Exercising the brain. My name is Jessica Tax, and I am with Move Up Health and Fitness. This support group is the Movers and Shakers of Fresno. It's a Parkinson's support group that we actually host in our gym. Okay, so what we will cover. We're going to do an overview of the brain. We'll discuss how the brain works and how it develops over time. We're going to discuss physical exercise, looking at the current findings on exercise and brain health. We'll go over mental exercises, discussing current research on that, and what type of mental exercises are beneficial. And then we'll take some time to put together your own personal brain fitness plan, so you get a chance to implement the things that you're learning today. Okay, so we're going to do a very, very simplified look at how the brain works. Essentially, there are cells in the brain called neurons, and they're responsible for communicating with each other. They send the message down certain pathways, and those pathways determine what kind of response you get. So whether that's a physical response like walking, or it's a mental response like recognizing a song on the radio. And those are the ones that we're going to focus on for today in terms of our exercises and things like that. So what I want you to envision is this network of these cells, and it kind of functions in the same way that a switchboard would function, where the message is received and then it's passed on through another pathway to another cell, and then that's continued to be passed on. So the cell receives the message and decides which pathway to send it down, and then that determines what kind of response you get. The thing that we're going to focus on today is building more of these pathways and reinforcing the pathways that you have. So the more you have, the better over time, and the stronger they are, the better your function. So we're going to take a quick look at brain development throughout the lifespan, and this is a very, very quick look. This was an entire course in college. So when we think about, you know, an infant versus an older child, and we think about how their brain functions, what I want you to recognize is that is a progression that occurred over years, and it's built upon building blocks. Like, it's not something that happens overnight, and it's not skills that they're developing from scratch. It's really a progression, and it's something that you want to keep in mind when you're doing your own mental development. Your brain is still malleable, but you have to work in a progressive fashion. It's not going to happen overnight. It is stuff that you have to do over time. And you will need to engage in these exercises for extended periods of time, for months, before you really start to see the benefits of doing these exercises. So, and just a few things that I want to point out here too. When we think about children, we recognize that they need rich, engaging, immersive environments for them to learn. And we don't necessarily do that for ourselves. A lot of times children are placed in very new experiences, and it is new sounds, it's new sights, it's new smells, it's new people, it's a new environment entirely. And they're really thrown in, and they have to learn to adapt. And then there's the repetition of it. They continue to go to that environment, they continue to experience those things, and eventually over time, that helps to develop their brain. Okay, so let's get into physical exercises. So there are immediate and long-term benefits to exercise. Specifically, the immediate benefits that you get from exercise are due to increased blood flow to the brain and increased production of certain chemicals. And those effects can last for 2 hours after an exercise bout. And the benefits include mostly executive function type things like your attention, working memory, process speed of processing information, things of that nature. And then the long-term benefits are due to an increased vascularization of the brain, so more blood flow in general because you have more blood vessels, increased growth and development of nervous tissue itself, faster maturation of new neuron development. So the new neurons develop and mature faster. There's increased volume of the part of the brain responsible for memory. It's called the hippocampus. So that actually grows over time with exercise, consistent exercise. And there's also improved plasticity. So the brain is more capable of forming and reforming and organizing connections. So that's that, creating more pathways, strengthening those pathways. So the exercise allows the brain or puts the brain into a state where it is able to do these things more readily. And I want you to keep that in mind when we start talking about mental exercises, because you want your brain to be more plastic. So you can use the exercise component, the physical exercise component, to help support the mental exercise component.
Now, does this continue? Like, I know you said it's important to start when you're younger to kind of learn those exercising and keep active and fit. Now, if you're older adult, does this apply to that?
Yes.
Or does it still improve? And okay.
Yes. Yeah. So the studies have shown that adults will still have this reaction to exercise, both the, the immediate benefits, the 2 hours after your exercise session, and then over time. And the plasticity of the brain is maintained throughout life. So it used to be believed that as we got older, your brain just didn't work as well. There was really no point in trying, because it was just a fact of aging that your brain stopped functioning as well. And that's not really true. And we'll touch on that a little bit more as we go into the mental exercise side of it. But basically, studies have shown as you get older, your brain is still malleable. Okay, so when we talk about physical exercise and improving cognitive function, what is best? So studies have done a variety of different exercise regimens and seen what is most effective. High intensity interval training has been shown to provide the most cognitive benefit and the best protection against neurological disease such as dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and Parkinson's disease. So it is not the only answer, but when we talk about best, this is really where you get the most benefit. So I wanted to take a little bit of time to do some math and work on figuring out what your target heart rate is. So when we talk about high intensity interval training, your goal is to get your heart rate up to 70 to 85% of your heart rate max. So, so we have to determine that in order to be able to get into that target zone. And high intensity interval training, you get into that zone and then you let your heart recover and then you get back into that zone. So that's where the interval part of it comes from. You're not doing this for an extended period of time. And in theory, if you're doing it right, you can't, because high intensity drains the energy supply too quickly. So high intensity tends to be things that you can only do for maybe a couple of minutes, but more than likely, 30 seconds to a minute. So I'd like to take some time to do our target heart rate zones. So I know it's kind of condensed. I tried to throw it on there so you could see it, but it's not as clear as I would like it to be. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to take 220 and you're going to go ahead and subtract your age. And then you would need to subtract your resting heart rate. So if you want to do this right now, you would place, two fingers, not your index finger, on the inside of your wrist in line with your thumb. Typically there's those tendons. You want to put it kind of right up there. You should be able to feel your pulse. You could technically do your neck as well. And you would do it for 15 seconds. So you'd want to find a timer and you're going to count. So I'm going to time for 15 seconds. Okay, ready, set, go. Stop. Okay, so write that number down so you don't forget it. And then you're going to times it by 4 to get what your heart rate would be in a minute. And in theory, that's going to be your resting heart rate because we've been sitting here for a little while now. So 220 minus your age minus that resting heart rate gives us our heart rate reserve, which is what that HRR stands for. So then you take your heart rate reserve and you're going to multiply that by 0.7 and by 0.85. So you need two different numbers here. And then you're going to add them back into your resting heart rate. So whatever that heart rate was that you just got. So hopefully that's not super confusing. So I have an example here where if you're 70 years old and your heart rate, your resting heart rate is 75, your high intensity interval training target zone would be between 128 to 139 beats per minute. This is nice if you want to be exact, and I know there are watches out there now that will give you your heart rate. They're not exactly foolproof, so you want to be careful when you're using those. I personally really like to use rate of perceived exertion. So it's a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being you could do it all day. It's not, you don't feel like you're exerting yourself at all. And a 10 is like maybe a 10-second burst, or let's say you're lifting something, you could only do it once. So typically when you're doing something like a walk, you'll be in like a 3, maybe a 4 if you're walking quickly. What you're shooting for is a 6 to 8. So like I said, it should be something that you feel like you're really exerting yourself, and you shouldn't be able to do it for a long period of time. If you're doing it for a long period of time, you're probably more in like a 5, 6, maybe 4, depending on what activity you're doing. So this is specifically for higher intensity, okay? Correct. And typically what you'll see is there is a delay in the heart rate response. So when you first start exercising at a higher intensity, it's going to take a little while to get up there, which is another reason why I like the RPE, the rate of perceived exertion. But so he would take his pulse like after that, like while he's doing his resting phase of the interval training, and then get his heart rate then to see if he was in that target zone. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. So, like I said, high intensity interval training is not the only answer. It's just when you are looking at getting the cognitive benefits as well as the protective benefits, it's really high intensity interval training that is responsible for providing those benefits. However, in general, they say those recommendations that you do for heart health are also good for brain health. So you want to shoot for recommended 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic exercise weekly, which is about 30 days a week, 5 days a week, 5 days out of the week. The alternative is also 75 minutes of high intensity aerobic exercise weekly, which is about 15 minutes, 5 days a week. So those are your options. So if you really want to incorporate that high intensity into your aerobic fitness routine, then you actually cut down on your time. And that's something that I want to point out, is that high intensity interval training is good for the brain and it's good for your health, but it is high intensity and it does take a toll on the body, and you need to make sure that you're getting rest. So you don't want to just kind of constantly pound the body with that high intensity exercise. You need to make sure that you take time to recover so that you don't get injured, so you don't have setbacks. The other thing is, from the studies that were done, they did show that something is better than nothing. So being active at the level that you can be is better than not doing anything. And that something that you will stick with consistently is ultimately the best. So if you can do it, every day, if you can do it 5 days a week and you're very consistent with it, that's better than essentially like a yo-yo exercise plan where you're like really exercising hard for like 2 weeks and then you take off for 2 months because you overdid it or because you just don't really enjoy it or whatever the case may be. And then keep in mind that consistency is key there are 2 points to this. It does take approximately 6 months of meeting those recommendations to see the long-term benefits. So those long-term benefits of increased vascularization. I don't know if I finished talking about that stuff. I might have gotten sidetracked. You've got increased vascularization, those more pathways, stronger pathways, the maturation of those new neurons. All of that stuff takes about 6 months before you really start seeing those benefits. And the benefits of that are improved memory, some components of memory, attention, and reasoning. So more of those executive functions and then memory. You also have to continue with your training regimen, or you lose it. So if you don't keep it up, so that's that whole consistency, and that what you will do is ultimately best. If you can't maintain it, or if you aren't maintaining it, then you're going to start to see some declines of those benefits. Okay, so I'm going to skip this part, but we were going to do some exercise. I was going to do a little warm up and a little bit of a high intensity. So we're going to switch gears. We're going to get into our mental exercises. And again, we'll look at what's best. So studies have shown that you're looking for activities that are intellectually challenging, socially engaging, and personally meaningful. So you want all 3 of those aspects wrapped into an activity. Those are going to be your best bet in really exercising the brain. So again, I take you back to that child development that we talked about. We make sure that children are in these rich, engaging, new environments in order for them to learn. It's the same thing for adults. So you want to try things that you've never tried and really get into the experience. If it's something that you have to touch, that like the new sensations are important, new sounds, new smells, all of that goes into sensory input into the brain. It stimulates the brain, and then we start to build new pathways. So when we talk about quantity and quality, this is similar to physical exercise in that it is important to be frequent and consistent with your approach. There wasn't necessarily a recommendation on how much time you should put into a certain activity, but it was clear that you want to be consistent with it, and that you do need to engage in these activities more than once. So for example, if you were to choose a new recipe that you want to try out, you don't want to cook that recipe once and then never see it again. You want to cook that new recipe and then challenge yourself to cook it again, and then challenge yourself to cook it again, and get that repetition. And essentially, you want to try and master things, because that is really where the idea of mental exercise is. It's this concept of learning something and working on it until you master it. So you want to choose activities that engage the mind in various ways. So again, you're looking for different types of senses that you can engage. Can you go into a whole new environment where, you know, the sounds are different, the visuals are different, what you're eating is different, all of that. And then are there new people that you have to engage with? Are there new activities that you have to participate in? All of that stuff is really what you're going for. And then I have a little list here of, like, I guess, like a little checklist of things that you can keep in mind when you're looking for certain activities. You want things that require reasoning, critical analysis, and strategy or planning. I try to think of gardening in this way. You really have to plan out how you're going to put the plants so they get enough sunlight and they get enough water and they don't overcrowd each other. You have to use reasoning and critical analysis to make sure that you're watering them enough if they start to look like they're wilting, things like that. Stuff that demands your focus. So multitasking while you're also trying to do these mental exercises, unless that's the goal, is not helpful. So you want to make sure that you're setting aside time to really focus on these activities. Keep in mind that things that are also emotionally engaging are also mental exercises. And we don't often think of emotions as mental exercise, but they are. So things where you have the ability to recognize recognize and respond to both your own emotions and the emotions of the other person involved in the activity if you're involved with other people. Stuff that is socially engaging requires cooperation, helping, support of others. That's what you're looking for in terms of social. And then requires communication. So you could think of like a team sport, and this would be a great activity to do that's mentally engaging, because you have to communicate with others. You have to react to maybe some body language that you're getting from them, so that way the other team doesn't know what you guys are planning. You have to plan and strategize. So something like that is really what you're looking for. I did look at studies for, you hear a lot about like the brain games that you can download onto your phone, and Sudoku and things like that. And the consensus is that those activities are better than nothing. It's like the exercise, the same thing with physical exercise. Something is better than nothing. So if you can't go out and join a sport, or gardening, or a new hobby, then maybe doing those brain games can help stimulate the brain. But you don't want to, if you had to choose, if you have to do the opportunity cost evaluation, your time is better spent in these more engaging activities. Okay, so we're going to take a little bit of time to do some interactive stuff here. So, and I just have two smaller exercises for you to try out that incorporate some of these ideas from the mental exercise component of our talk. So let me pull these out here. Okay, this is where you need your pen and paper, and you want to make sure that you leave enough paper for your plan, which we'll get to later. Okay, so what I'd like for you to do, I'll give you a minute. We won't take a long time to do this. I want you to take a minute and look around the room and look around your environment and describe it in as much detail as possible. You can use bullet points. You don't have to write full sentences, but describe your environment. Things that you are touching, things that you are seeing, things that you are hearing, things that you are smelling. None of us are eating, so I guess taste is out. But all of that stuff. So taking in colors and textures and contrasts and sounds and things like that. 1 minute, writing down as much detail as you possibly can. Ready, set, go. All right, that's a minute. Okay, so one more exercise. This one is a little different. So I want you to, I'll give you another minute. I want you to make the case for why your favorite flavor of ice cream is the ultimate best flavor of ice cream. And if you don't have a favorite flavor or you don't like ice cream, you can pick your favorite food. Okay, but you've got to make a solid case for why this food or this ice cream flavor is the best, and you're trying to convince others of this truth that you know in your heart. Okay, you get 1 minute. Ready, set, go. All right, you can go ahead and stop. Okay. So those were some fun little exercises that just required a little bit more mental engagement than maybe we would normally use in any just moment of our day. Um, they're, like I said earlier, you really want mental activities that are way more engaging than that. These are really kind of smaller activities that you can do. Um, but I want you to keep those in mind when you actually are trying to incorporate mental exercises into your day. You do want to get into these experiences and take in as much of the experience as possible. Um, as we get older, we tend to um, like learn to ignore the things that we don't deem important, which is fine and it's important in our functioning of our day to day. But it also means that we don't tend to pay as much attention to our environment. And so we don't tend to take in new things. We also tend to not go into new environments. Um, so it's something that you want to keep in mind when you're doing these mental exercises, whatever activities you decide to implement. And there's an aspect of critical thinking that you want to do. So when you think about your social engagements, sitting down with friends and having a conversation, but having a conversation that requires some debate, or maybe you're just asking them how they would respond to a certain situation or something like that, where you guys are critically thinking about how you would act or respond, or how you would say things or whatever. That's really where you're getting that mental exercise. Okay, so we're going to get into our making of a plan, but I want to pause here for a second and just summarize what we went over. So your plan should incorporate something physical or mental exercises. And when you're thinking about your physical exercises, we talked about how important it is for those aerobic exercises, high intensity or moderate intensity. But we're really looking at aerobic exercise here. So things like swimming, walking, cycling, rowing, dancing, things that are going to use most of your body in a continuous movement. Those are the type of exercises that you want to focus on when you're thinking about your fitness, your physical fitness plan. And then when you're thinking about your mental exercises, things like joining a debate team. I think Toastmasters is even giving speeches, doing an improv class, doing some kind of acting class, going to a new museum and exploring something that you would return to, so that way you can learn how to navigate the museum and you get familiar with the environment. Let's see what other, or learning a new skill, such as a new recipe, a new game, and learning the words to a new song, learning how to play a song, and then or throwing in something like volunteering, where you're getting that very meaningful activity, and teaching, sharing your skills with others and helping them to learn how to do things. So those are really kind of some of the activities that I want you to focus on. So looking at your, so first let me pause. Are there any questions at this point? Any clarification that you guys maybe want, or more details? Okay. So then we'll go on. So what I want you to do is to take a self account of what type of physical activity you engage in now and what type of mental activities you engage in now. And your main focus should be on things that are missing from all of those things that we went over. If you're already doing the physical aspect of exercising, then you don't need to focus on that as much. When we were talking about, physical exercise and mental exercise, the benefits that you get are really in comparison to people who are not doing those things. So if you're already doing them, they're not as important. So you want to focus on the things that you're not already doing. And then I want you to create a plan for what you would like to do physically, what you would like to do mentally, keeping in mind that it should be progressive, like we do with children. You want to have building blocks. And I want you to be realistic, and I want you to be specific. So if your plan is to start walking 3 days, if your plan is to start walking, I want you to say, okay, my plan is to start walking 3 days a week for 20 minutes, because maybe you're not doing anything. I want to start walking for 3 days a week, 20 minutes, and I'm going to do it in the morning. So being as specific as you can be. And then maybe your mental exercise is going to be taking up gardening. And so you're going to make sure that you're gardening 2 days a week, engaging with that garden, planning it out, taking care of it, and learning how to garden. Any questions before I give you guys some time to work on that? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and give you guys 3 minutes. So you get plenty of time. If you have any questions, you can always pop on and ask me questions. And at the end of this, we're going to review the plan that you put together. And then I can help you if there are details or things like that that you have questions about, or maybe want some suggestions. Okay, so 3 minutes.